welcome to The Way Forward. I am Chanaka De Silva. Today on our program we have Roshanie, Jayasundara, Moraes, Executive Vice President, John Keells Group, to speak on the advantages of the working woman and what they could bring to the home. Welcome to the show, Roshanie.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like you to tell me, describe of the position of the woman in today's working environment across the board. I mean, how are they now, as at now?
I think it's much better than what it was a couple of decades ago. There is a lot of discussion about the working woman. Lots of companies are making way for career women, and I think there's a lot of consideration about how we accommodate the working woman. Having said that, I think it's nowhere near what it should be. I also think when you talk about the working woman, you mustn't talk about only the person who goes out to work into an office or a place outside the home, because there is this component of unpaid work which is not accounted for in any economy. So even a person who stays home and looks after children and looks after the house is contributing in some way, but that quantum of work we don't value and we don't put a number to it, and as a result it's not reflected in the GDP or any financial statement that is produced. Without that person, one cannot have society go forward. Society can't exist without that stay-at-home person. At the same time, it is important that we get more and more women to go to the workforce. You know, we calculate labor force participation of women at 30-something%. While that is good, I think we must now look at putting some value to that woman who's at home doing something else. And also, I don't know if we calculate the value of all the small entrepreneurs, you know, the string hopper ladies, the hopper ladies, you know, people who make food, people who do a little sewing at home. There is a lot of contribution from them, but I'm not too sure if all that is recorded anywhere as working women. But yeah, so to answer your question, I think things are changing, but there's a lot more to change, and I think everyone must give some consideration to this 50% of the world, 50% of the population, perhaps sometimes is not accounted for in the workforce.
Now, when you say 50%, now you said there are 30% of that 50% is working.
30% of the total, yes, 30%. If you take the workforce, you have 30-something% women in the workforce.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that means, am I correct to assume that the 30% comes from the 50% in the population, right? So that means there's only 20% at home.
No. If you take the total workforce,
yes,
of
30%.
that, 30% are
women, right, which is not necessarily 30% of the population.
No.
So still, do you think there's a larger portion staying at home, or is there a larger portion coming to work?
I think there's a larger portion staying at home. And if you take Sri Lanka alone, I think it's Sri Lanka, I'm saying. 30%
yes,
of the workforce is only women, only 30%, around 30% is women. So, 50-50 population, I think in Sri Lanka
it's
the
more,
women folk are a little more, then it's not a proper representation. Despite us having a lot of female labor intensive industries.
Like the garment factories.
Yeah.
Now, the garment factories would take, when you take those figures into consideration, of the 30%, what share would they take? I mean, I am trying to categorize that category of worker, then the more professionally qualified ones.
I don't have that data.
That figure is still not out yet. No, that's quite all right, because I think someone should quantify that amount, because especially with the exports depending on this labor force. Now, then my next question to you would be, can you tell me exactly what you see as an advantage of a woman coming to work?
I think the main point would be the contribution towards the economy.
Right.
A woman to come to work, to any job, one has to have a certain level of education. Once you have that education, education gives you a lot of confidence. And once you educate a woman, it helps the family, whether she is working or not, working in any form. It helps the family, it helps the children grow up in a certain way. It helps to educate the children. And there is that famous saying that, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a village.
Right.
So if that's true, educating a woman and getting that person to be productive has to help the society in a very, very positive way.
Right. Now, there is a lot of controversy about should the woman work or should not the woman work. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the contribution by the woman at home, who is the mother and the wife and looks after the children, waits for them, all that, is not that it's not valued, it's not quantified.
It's not quantified. Yeah.
Yes, because I think we have seen when there's a large migration of workers overseas, where the women went, there was almost, or is there, if I may say so, disaster in those families, because that whole foundation was taken off suddenly, because I think everyone took the mother for granted.
Yeah.
Right? And then suddenly there is this vacuum, and there's a grandmother who can't cope, and the man who doesn't, can't cope either. And then the children go haywire, and we had a lot of issues. So you are quite right saying it is not valued, but is there any way that these women, I would say, who are the real frontline people in society, who keep everything in line, should be helped or anything like that, to given a hand to do what they do better? What do they require? What do they lack in this society?
I think firstly it's education where it's needed, so that they are able to do some work outside the home. Secondly, I think our systems in society, our support systems are not enough, and especially in Sri Lanka, we don't have fairly organized and developed support systems, professionally organized and developed support systems to help the lady of the house to go out and work and get her children looked after at a daycare center or wherever, or after school daycare centers. We don't see too many of those. I mean, there are the one or two rare ones, good ones in and around the city.
Yeah.
But Colombo is not the whole of the country.
True.
So out there, I think we need to build the support system. It's getting harder and harder to depend on the extended families now, which was in an Asian culture,
Yes.
which was our mainstay. My mother worked right throughout her career, and she had the support system of our grandparents from time to time. But that's not there at the moment, and that's also changing. And more and more older people are engaged in activity. They have work to do, they have work outside their home. Anybody in their 60s, 70s are very active today, unlike 20 years ago. So sometimes they are not available to look after children. So I think we need to build the support system.
Yes, support system, can you be a little more specific? Daycare centers for children, yes, one. Anything else you could think of?
I think daycare centers in offices, companies must also look at giving flexi time off, and you can get the productivity in a different form with, when you have technology advanced to the level we have today, and we expect it to advance further. This kind of flexibility should be possible. We must make it possible. And if you want, when you alienate 50% of the population, you're also not making use of the talents available. Women have different talents, and it helps to have diversity in the office, because they come from different angles, they think differently. So naturally diversity is good in anything, as we
yes,
know,
that's true.
and in any form. So one must make, I think companies also must look at changing their systems and processes, giving flexi time, giving time off, in order to accommodate the woman in the corporate arena or the workforce.
Now, when you talk of now flexi time and things have been actually very available for a long time, like 30-40 years in the West, right? Here, very few people. Why do you see it's still not working here? I mean, flexi times would, number one is the traffic congestion.
Yes.
Right? And as you said, with the internet connections we have and these speeds, you can easily work from home and be as productive, like you said, and still spend time with your children and all that. What is holding these companies back in implementing this? Why do you think it's not still implemented?
I think some companies are doing it very well.
Yes.
It's not every job that can have flexi
Yes,
time.
of
It's
course.
not every job that can work remotely. But there are certain functions that can do this. And I know of some companies who do it, who are very supportive of this. But I think it is again a mindset change.
Right.
And also accommodating that process in your normal process, the process that has worked for a company for the last 20 years, sometimes you're kind of set in that
you don't want to change.
You don't want to change. When you're changing also, you're expecting the woman to change more than the process to change.
Right.
But I think if you want the woman's contribution and if you want to use that talent in your team, we must make this change faster, because it is quite a bit of talent that you're losing by not engaging them in business and economic activity.
Yes. Now the next thing is the professional woman. Now she has to study, look after the family, work, contribute, face the same stresses, right, and all that. Where do you find her place now? Now there is a lot of talk about women not getting equal position in this country. Do you see that happen? I mean, say two equally qualified people, a man and a woman. Is there a drop in progress for the woman, or is she getting a better chance?
Okay, so I think there were two questions.
Yes.
About equality, I think we must accept that nature has made man and woman for two different roles. Naturally and biologically, we are made differently for a certain purpose in the world. The faster you accept that, the better it is. So when you talk of equality, you must talk in that context. Everything cannot be equal.
Equal, yes, of course.
When you are a woman, you are a woman. How equal can you get? And do you want to get equal? I don't know. Okay, so that's the answer about equality, because that's my personal view.
Yes.
I'm not sure if we should we should want to do everything that a man does.
We will go in for a short break now. We have been discussing the women's role in today's workplace and society. We'll be back soon. Welcome back after the break to the way forward. We have been discussing the equality of women and her position in career advancement in today's workplace. Welcome back, Roshanie.
Thank you.
We were discussing about how this equality is discussed, about man and woman, and you had a very interesting position. Please continue.
Yeah, so that's my position about equality. I think we must accept our position in society, fulfill that biological role that you are made for, and drive society in that manner. If you talk about diversity in in the corporate world, which was I think your second point in the question, yes, we are still not there yet, but I can see progress. There are a lot of initiatives to promote women on boards, progress for women in the corporate world. If you look at, and you also asked whether career progression is equal for men and women, the numbers say it's not. But I also think that women do take time off to have children, look after children, and when they get back to the workforce, so they are a few steps behind. To somebody, if you take two people who started together, at some point, if the woman takes time off, you're lagging behind a little bit. So in that sense, it's not equal. That's where we must take note in society, because she is taking time off to look after children for society.
Yes.
And even for that the children she is looking after in the family and educating and doing all of this and guiding and nurturing are the future labor force of the country. Now, so that's valuable work. Country, governments and corporates must take note of that.
This is the future resource.
This is your future employees.
Yes.
These are your future employees that are being groomed in the younger years. We talk about millennials, we talk about Gen Z, and we talk about all kinds of young groups who are different. They have the positives, negatives, they are just different. I mean, like our grandmothers would have said, we are different.
Yes.
So society goes on, and it's almost like an evolution happening. But whatever negatives you see in a child later on, you have to think about how much that child had time with the family and at home. So that's important when you consider the mother's role in nurturing. We shouldn't think about it as looking after children. If you look at it as somebody who's training your future labor force,
yes.
I think the corporates will think differently.
Yes, like you said earlier, there should be a value to that as well.
Yeah, so then it's easy to put a value to that, because it's the next generation and the next generation of your workers being looked after at home, being trained and educated
Rather than
at home.
Suffer for what you are doing, you should actually be rewarded.
Yes.
Because it's not everyone who raises children anyway.
Yeah.
So the ones who do need not pay back with their career prospects. No? Good point. So now my other question is, in this country, especially for the women, what would you say should be the next level of facilities they should get?
I think access to education.
Right.
If we can make education available, whatever, whether it's vocational or otherwise, access to training and education would help.
Right.
Availability of safe and transportation systems, safe and convenient transportation systems, so that the children can go to school, come back, or somebody can take the children and come back without wasting time on the road. I think is the second one, I would think. Healthcare, I think access to healthcare is another thing, I think.
Very important. Yes, and when you mentioned the safe transport system, I remember we had a very safe transport system here. Quite safe. You could, our state system was quite good, but then now it's not safe anymore. And I think a lot of the parents on the road just looking after the children, taking them back and forth from school, which means a lot of resources.
That's a lot of time on
time
the road.
And resources wasted.
If you make this transport system efficient and safe and convenient, you will save a lot of time for the woman. And that's, we talk about where you live. Generally, if you can live in a place where you can access education, schooling, shopping and all of that conveniently, wherever in Sri Lanka, you build these town centers and build these villages so that children don't have to travel very far for schooling. You build the school system around the villages.
Yes.
And then they can very nicely exist. and run their businesses, and the women can be productive too.
Yeah, because there's a lot of unnecessary traveling around the place.
Yes.
No? How about facilities like banking? Because now there are things where the bank comes home. How important do you think that is to these women who work from home?
I think that's important, funding, banking, that whole financial system.
Yes.
But that has progressed to some extent where the bank comes home.
Yes.
I think there's a lot more to do, but still,
Yes.
but that industry has, I think, progressed quite a bit where the bank is very close to them.
Yeah. Now, as for giving them loans, facilities, insurance, because they are also a very viable industrial force, if I may use the word. Do you think there is enough done there?
I'm not too sure whether there's enough done there, because today you have to prove to the bank that you don't need the money to borrow the money. So, you know, it's
Yes.
kind of a joke.
Yes.
If you don't have collateral, you can't
Yes.
borrow.
Borrow.
So, how would a lady who's starting off a business with no collateral go to the bank and borrow? So, as a result, she goes to the lenders, the loan sharks, and
yes.
gets into more trouble.
Trouble.
So, I think the lending system, I'm not a banker, I can't talk so much about
Yes.
that, but I certainly know that you have to prove to the bank that you don't need the money.
Then
Only
you
then
get the
they
money.
will give you
They
the
will
money.
come offering you the money. Yes, that was someone very beautifully said about your another explanation for collateral. They give you money on who your grandfather was. So I asked him why. He said, if you have assets now, it's not what your parents bought, it was what your grandparents bought. So which means if your grandfather and mother were good and successful, you are the guy
Now
who gets
you
the
can
money,
borrow,
right? Because you have collateral. Right? I think the banking system must change like in other countries, perhaps give a creditworthiness to every person, judge them for their merits and give something like that. Now, other question I really want to know is, when a professional woman migrates, right? Now there are people working in banks, maybe other corporates, maybe even in some other categories also they go to the Middle East and things like that to work. It's a wide range. What help should the family that stays behind get from the country, the government? Because as we discussed early on, now that whole family has a bit of a vacuum. Should that family, because they work and send in the foreign currency, they are the ones who are sending the foreign currency. They are, in heaven's name, they should get something, right? Except that very paltry duty-free allowance to buy some unnecessary items on the shops. What should the family benefit? Do you think they should have some facility from the bank for these people who go out and earn for the country, the women?
The migrant workers
Yes.
who go for domestic work.
Not necessarily, but if it is a woman who goes, right? Because if a woman goes, whoever she is, a migrant, basic migrant worker or professional woman, and the family is here, the family is still the same. Family doesn't have the mother, right? Should not the government help these people? Should she not have something in the back of her mind, okay, because I am doing this, I am covered. There is help available for me. I know there isn't a system, but what do you think of that?
I don't know what the government can do in terms of that, other than provision of insurance and that kind of facility. But very often at a higher level, if it's a professional woman who's migrating out for a job, I would think the family travels with her.
Yes.
Very often.
Very.
The most affected are the migrant workers who go for lower jobs, who obviously can't take the family.
Yeah.
I think we should build in the education system, some insurance schemes for the family who's staying behind. I think life insurance, medical insurance, tied to the remittance they make.
Yes.
I think something like that would help.
Right. Finally, if the improvements go on as we hope they would, in another 5 years, where do you see us? Do you see us much better for the women contributing to our society here, or where? What do you think?
I hope we see a better position. Even if you take the US, just last year the the percentage of women CEOs had dropped by 25%.
Dropped by 25%.
Dropped by 25%. So that's not very good. I hope we are not taking that kind of trend. I know we have a lot of initiatives, a lot of support from organizations pushing for diversity and board positions and representation in every sphere. I hope they continue and I hope they succeed. I hope we don't follow
America.
some other trends that we are seeing.
Right. So, there is no particular reason why it has dropped 25%.
Possibly the pipeline hasn't been there, right? We had a few there were a few very strong women who retired last year in corporate America. And perhaps the pipeline was not there to keep up with that number. So that's a failure on the part of the system, I would think.
Or failure, or maybe the next generation wasn't interested in going up the corporate ladder.
That could be too, because it's a personal choice you make.
Yes, because there's a
and
sacrifices
as a woman,
to be
yes,
made.
that's another point. It's a personal choice you make. What you want to do and where you want to go is a personal choice.
Right. Thank you very much, Roshanie. I think that was a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Thank you again. Till we meet again.